You sit down. We are going to live out what we did this week in our journals and create a little moment of silence and reflection. And so I want to invite you right now to close your eyes. Stand where you are. You could have your hands out in a posture of receiving or just your hands relaxed. And I want to invite you to reflect even right now. Where do I find myself pulled into, God? Do I find myself pulled into the future of what might be struggling to be present right now in this moment, worrying about some things that might be on the horizon? Or do I find myself pulled into the past, thinking about some of the challenges of this week or some of the things that maybe are drawing me away from you, God? And so I want to just take a moment and I want to invite you to come back before God, the creator of the universe, the king of not just our hearts, but of every single thing that exists. And I want to invite us to be present with him right now. So let's be silent and still. Pay attention to where we are. Be present before the creator of the universe. God, we make room for you. We want you. You know what we carry. You know the burdens. You know the challenges. You know the celebrations. You know all of it. And so we lay them at your feet. God, would you speak to us? Would you guide us? Strengthen us? Where we feel weak, would you remind us that you are at work? God, I ask that you would do what you want to do in our midst, in us and through us. And I ask specifically that as I speak, that you would speak through me and say specific things to each one of us, a reminder of what you are asking us, inviting us into. God, build your church. Have your way. In Jesus' name, amen. Go ahead and grab a seat. One quick thing before we get into it. I want to just invite you to make note of a special day that is coming. On October 20th, we are celebrating our 5th anniversary. And we're going to celebrate well. We're going to share stories, delight in what God has done and what God wants to do, and then we're going to eat together because we believe that feasting together is an appropriate way for us to celebrate. And the best part is, you don't have to bring anyone or anything except for you. You get to come and just eat food, celebrate. We get to joyously celebrate all of the stories of what God has done. So, October 20th, 11 a.m. here, 5th anniversary. Bring some people that maybe need to hear about what God is doing, and maybe, just maybe, through all that we've celebrated, that all that we are seeing, that people would come to understand Jesus. We are in this series, or more accurately, I don't know what to call it, journey, a journey of being formed and transformed. And so, I did it last week, but I'll do it again. If you are part of this, but you have not grabbed one of these journals, outside of these doors, you'll see are they there? There's a box of journals that George is going to grab, and they'll be up at the front, so you can grab them. Oops. This is the best part. The thing that I love so much about our church is that it is not about us trying to be polished and perfect, but instead for us to be a real community. I'm going to talk about community today, and then next week I'm going to talk about vulnerability, and that's on display. So, it may be uncomfortable for some of you, and that's okay, but if right now you don't have a journal, come on up and grab one, and if you don't want to grab one right now, you can grab one at the end of the service. Let me remind you why. Let me remind you why. If you haven't been around, maybe you don't know, or if you have not necessarily understood what we're trying to do, let me just give some context. There is a trellis that is out in the lobby, and a trellis is meant to create structure for growth. So as a church, as people who follow the way of Jesus, hopefully we want to grow. But in order to grow, we need to create some structures that create space for God to show up and move. And so what we're doing with the journal, with our co-groups, and on Sundays is we're pointing everything in the same direction. All of our energy. So if you're just coming on a Sunday and missing out on co-groups, you're missing out. If you're coming on a Sunday and not doing the journal, you're missing out, because all of it is pointing in the same direction. For us, we want to do what we can daily and regularly through the week to create space for God to grow us, to be formed and transformed. And so we're talking about, each week, we're talking about a different spiritual practice. And today, we're going to speak about the spiritual practice of community. Community can be one of those words that we say and intend, especially in the church, but all sorts of different meanings. And so I hope to bring clarity to it. But before I do, I want to acknowledge that community in the context of the church can become a buzzword. We say it. Come find community. Do life together. And we all go, okay, but what does that actually mean? We can throw that word around, community, with some level of carelessness. One of the books that I was reading this week, or over the last couple of weeks, was saying that community in the context of church is one of the most overpromised and underdelivered elements of a church. Overpromised and underdelivered. This creates some tension for me. Part of it is I think it's true. I think that we overpromise community, or at least some version of community, and we underdeliver it. But I think the risk here is that we can look at that as a big picture and absolve ourselves of our personal responsibility to build the kind of community we want to become. It's really easy to look and go, oh man, I can't find community anywhere. It's a lot harder to go, what am I doing about it? What am I building? How am I contributing? Because the truth is that all of us, all of you either contribute to the building of a healthy community or not. All of us are responsible for building the community because the community is us. We are the community. As a church, we don't want to just do church. We want to be the church, which means becoming a community. And it challenges us because we must, at some level, individually come to this place of not settling for something lesser. See, we can look and we can say, you know what, they said community, I didn't experience that, and we can live in that identity, or we can say, I want more. I want to build more. I want to fight against a culture of shallow, and I want to go deep. We live in a culture where it's easier to just keep the face, put the mask on, keep people at an arm's length, but that is not God's design for community. It certainly is not what we are attempting and trying to build here. For us, as we build the kind of community that is focused and centered around the way of Jesus, we want deep. We want counterformation. We want deep transformation in our lives. We want to build community in the way of Jesus, which is more difficult and much more beautiful. I want us to spend some time today painting the picture of this kind of community. And I want us to consider why we might avoid it. There will be some things that will poke and prod each of us. That's good. I love the passage in Hebrews 10, and I'm going to use it throughout this whole sermon. Hebrews 10, 24 to 25 says this: Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. This passage of Hebrews begins to paint a beautiful picture of community that we might call the church. The author of Hebrews is painting a picture for what community is supposed to be. And I don't know if you got sick of this passage through COVID, but it became like a rallying cry for every church that was trying to get people to come back in. Let's not neglect meeting together. And so there's this sense of going, it's all about Sunday. Just come back to Sunday. Just come back into the room. Just fill the seats again. And while I believe that meeting on Sunday, gathering on Sunday is integral to our faith, it is not enough. And I do not believe that the passage that is described here is only describing the gathered places, the places where we're in a crowd, where a few people are speaking or one person is speaking, but instead something more. I think that it is better than that. I think this invitation to gather together is not just on a Sunday, though that's a piece. I believe that it's also about us gathering and then scattering in homes through the week. It's not just about one day a week that we actually are living our lives in proximity to each other, but regularly spending time with each other in community. And doing what? Because for us, we believe in what we call co-groups. That is, our communities that meet through the week, that unpack what we're talking about on a Sunday, that live out and wrestle through the things that we are navigating. What do we do in those co-groups? We endeavor to do precisely what the author of Hebrews is challenging us to do, motivating each other to acts of love and good works. I think this passage is so interesting because it puts some responsibility on the individual. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Notice here there's acts of love and good works. There is an action component to what we are seeing here. There is a reminder for us that it is not just about knowing something, but doing it. There is an interplay between what we say and how we live. We are challenged to think of ways to motivate each other into acts of love and good works. We want to become people that increasingly live this stuff out. Like, we don't want to tolerate where there are places in our life where we say something and live differently. We want to continually close the gap between what we say and what we do. We want to motivate each other to acts of love and good works. Now, that combination of acts of love and good works tells us an interesting picture, because this is not defining love as we see it defined in culture, where love is letting everyone do whatever they want. That's love. Do whatever you want. Instead, it's acts of love and good works. There is a real implication here that living lives that are filled with acts of love and good works means actually doing what we know to be true, actually doing what Jesus invites us to do, actually living out the truth that we know through Jesus. There is a responsibility for us not just to motivate each other, yeah, good job, you can do it, but to actually say, are you doing the right things? Are we living in a way of sacrificial love defined by Jesus himself, or are we settling for something less? Said another way, we are called here to become a people of practice. Yeah, we're talking about practice. Doing what we say. Living it out. I've used the language of formation and counter-formation. This is an integral part of the church. To recognize areas in our life where we have been formed more by culture, or more by other people, or more by other voices and less by Jesus. And to consider, is it possible that I am settling for something less as a community? For us to challenge and encourage each other to continue to be formed and transformed by the way of Jesus. This is what community should be, a group of people that are doing that. There is an author that I've been reading a lot of named Ruth Haley Barton, and she had this quote. She said, "Community is not about us, but the transforming presence of Jesus." Now, even the beginning of this quote, I think if we're being at least somewhat self-reflective, kicks us in the stomach just a little bit. Community is not about us. You're like, well, it's a little about me. No, And I want to unpack what that actually looks like, but I want to remind us of what it is about, because it's easy to go, well, community is not just about us, and then we're left going, what is it about? Ruth Haley Barton tells us it's not about us, but the transforming presence of Jesus. And I want us to think about the implications of that. This is a part of why we did the journal, and this is a part of even what's happening in co-groups already. If community is not about us and it is about the transforming presence of Jesus, it means that we must become active participants in understanding what is God asking us to do? What is Jesus inviting us into? Where is he transforming us? How is he present? What is he saying? And what is he calling us to do? And the truth is, as Christians, we can pontificate and talk about all the things that God is asking us to do or saying to us, but if we don't do them, there's a disconnect. And for some of us, we don't experience transformation because we've heard God say something, we just don't do anything with it. And again, as a community of practice, we want to do what God says that we should do. And when God whispers things, he often does it in community with other people. And as he's whispering, we want to listen and do what he's asking us to do. So the best way for us to be in the presence, the transforming presence of Jesus, is not in isolation. One of the great disservices that we've done as the Protestant church especially is just saying it is your personal relationship with Jesus. And though that is true, if you look at the early church, it was always done communally. Growth happened in groups. People grew together. It was not just something that you did by yourself. It wasn't privatized. For us, we don't grow and learn to hear the voice of God and respond to his leading by ourselves. Satan's goal would be to keep us isolated and alone, and yet together is where we best grow, when Jesus' transforming presence is at the center. This is why the author of Hebrews cautions us not to neglect meeting together. Because there is power in consistently meeting. There is something that happens when we consistently spend time together. A few years ago, when we were living in Calgary, we had the opportunity to go to an AA meeting to celebrate one of my friend's birthdays. He had been sober for a length of time, and we got to celebrate. And in this AA, in this Alcoholics Anonymous group, I saw such a picture of community that it wrecked me. I saw elements of this AA community that looked more like church than I had seen churches look like. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it next week, but one of the things that they said that I could repeat, it was the mantra, was every single time someone would share their story, they would end with, keep coming back. Every single person, keep coming back. Keep coming back. Bring your stuff. Keep coming back. Just don't back away. And I feel like saying that sometimes in church. Not because I want to pad numbers or look out and see full seats. I just go, keep coming back. Don't back away. I've seen the tendency for people when they deal with challenging things to go, I'm going to go deal with this by myself. That is so harmful. Keep coming back. Embrace the power of consistency in community. The truth is that we do not build meaningful relationships with others with inconsistency. We don't build deep, transformative relationships with other people by seeing them every once in a while. And so even when it comes to co-group, that there are expectations and desires or hopes for you to demonstrate a level of commitment. Why? It's not just so that we can go, see, we're good. It's because we believe that if you are consistent, if you actually dedicate that time, that you can experience a depth of relationship that you are longing for. And the truth is that everything else will get in the way. You'll have all sorts of reasons not to go. I didn't sleep well that night. I had a lot going on. I'm just feeling kind of stressed. And you will find all sorts of reasons to back away. Why? Because the enemy of our souls would love to keep us isolated. And yet there is an invitation. Do not neglect meeting together. Spend time, prioritize time together in the transforming presence of Jesus. And it's not enough for us to seek out community when all hell is breaking loose in our lives. Some of us do that. We only reach out to other people when we're really not doing well. We're like, I really need help right now. And you go, okay, but where have you been? Well, right now I really need help. And if you're dealing with something, we want you to share that. But we want you to also experience community in the ordinary, at some points, humdrum of life. Because that's where the real stuff happens. It's not in the highs and the lows only. It's in the ordinary moments that we galvanize and strengthen these bonds and carrying each other's burdens together. Consistency in community is so unbelievably important. But it has a caveat. Because you can consistently show up to something and yet not be present there. You can check it off. Hey, I was at co-group, didn't get much out of it, didn't really like it. Did you share much? No. Okay. Did you just kind of like wait for other people to ask you questions? Yeah. Okay, that's a way to do it. It's not a very fruitful one. Like for us, we could just show up. This is the thing that I know to be true. We can create all sorts of structures for growth. And you could do little bits. You could pick and choose. You could show up. But if you don't want this kind of community, one that is centered around the transforming presence of Jesus, there will be tension for you. But the invitation is so much better. We don't want you just to check it off and show up, sign up for a co-group, show up every once in a while and just kind of go, yeah, how are you? Great, blessed, highly favored. Great. What we would rather do, and I'll talk about next week, is create an environment where there is shared, costly vulnerability, where we can get to the real stuff, where you don't have to pretend. Listen, there's all sorts of places right now that you have to pretend. This is not one of them. We don't want to do that here. Now, that creates tension for all of us. Good. I will continue to do what I can to share things that at times I don't love about myself because I want to model that. Because this is what we want to become. Community is a place where we can actually be who we are and then work through the process of becoming more like Jesus. There's something so profound in not trying to pretend anymore. I'm partially preaching next week's sermon. It is all about Jesus. The Sunday school answer, and yet it is true. We want to build a different kind of community here. We want to build the kind of community where we center everything that we do around Jesus. We exist to make it all about people seeing Jesus. It's about Jesus first. And yet, if we're being honest, we can create tension or feel tension. Because like Ruth Haley Barton's quote, it's not about us. Sometimes we go, but it's a little about me, right? Can I make it a little bit about me? We want to make it more and more about the transforming presence of Jesus. There is a theologian who died young at the hands of the Nazis named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His thoughtfulness, his books are profound. His biography it's like really long and so jam-packed with all sorts of really convicting, challenging things. And he has this quote that I'm going to share that I think was going to punch us all in the proverbial gut. So I'll let him do that. He says, "The person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community." I have seen the harm of uncommunicated expectation for building community. When people come into community and they expect that people should just know what they need or want or long for without having conversations of talking through it, it can crush community. If you come into community and you're like, everyone else should ask how I'm doing, but you're not willing to do that for other people, it crushes community. Part of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer is calling us to do is kill the wish dream of community for something better. The wish dream is this idealized version of community that we have, that we walk in with, and instead embracing real community where we love each other and build community as a result of that. For so many of us, if we have uncommunicated expectations that we begin to hold everyone else against or mark what they're doing against, it crushes community. Our idealized versions of community do need to be put to death because they never quite measure up. Outside of Jesus at the center, Jesus' transforming community, transforming presence in community, all of the other things that we might hope for in community do not measure up. Why? Because real community is messy. If you were to ask people in co-groups, they would be honest and say that loving everyone isn't always easy. Or if you've followed Jesus for any length of time, you know not everyone is easy to love. But love ceases to be love if we only bestow it to those that somehow deserve it. Real community means that there are people in our midst that kind of grate on us. And rather than seeing it as this beautiful invitation for God to change us, so many of us go, I don't like it. I just want to be around people that think like me, act like me, vote like me. And instead, this way of Jesus, this way of community is something different. We get to be drawn together not by all of the other things, but by Jesus himself. And then we embark on this journey of growing together to become more like him together. But it's messy to do that because someone might say something that you disagree with. Someone might challenge you in a way that you don't like. And yet, this is real community. It pokes and prods on this tendency to only be around people that are just like us. We live in a culture that has all sorts of pockets of people that only spend time with people that think exactly like them, and we don't want to build that here. We want to recognize that each of us have unique contributions to conversations. If all of us are putting Jesus at the center, then in the mix of all of that, it's my favorite to actually navigate. What does that look like to do that together, to put Jesus at the center and to recognize that all of us come from different perspectives and different backgrounds. And yet, if we are united around Jesus, then something significant can happen. In real community, and this is why many of us avoid it, we can't hide anymore. Our real self eventually comes out. I used to have the running joke of when people would date, there'd be like a 3-month period that they would have the perfect, like, I'm the most wonderful human being, and then usually you could keep that up for 3 months, and then after 3 months, you're like, nope. And that's why you see lots of couples, they're like, done. You're like, yeah, because I saw you. Well, think about that in the context of community. We can pretend for a little bit. Not here. Here it's a lot harder, I'll just be honest. It's harder to pretend here. But you can for a little bit. But then at some level, your heart's on display, which means your immaturity's on display, your weaknesses are on display, some of the things that you go, I kind of wish that wasn't a part of me. But why is that so important? Because love in the context of community is only love when people love us for who we actually are. When they see us and our strengths and our weaknesses and all the things that we're trying to follow the way of Jesus and yet not getting it all right. People need that. And that's where real community is built. That's where real love is experienced. Because if you are loved for the version of you that you present to people who is not you, that is not love. But when you are loved in all your fears and failures and flaws, and when you are consistently called into the transforming presence of Jesus, that is what community could be. One of the challenges in community and why we resist it in that is we'd rather resist the tension or even the conflict. Real relationships are developed through, at times, conflict. At times, misunderstanding each other and clarifying with each other and working through things. That is how we build real community. And because Jesus is at the center of all of it, we see every single moment as an opportunity to clarify and again to fix our eyes on Jesus and to invite him to transform us in the midst of the tension. In her book, Ruth Haley Barton has another quote that she is quoting someone that I'm not familiar with. And the quote is very simple but beautiful, and I wanted to share it. Rose Mary Doherty said this: "We need a community of people who can help us seek God. We need a community of people that can help us seek God. We don't just need people that are in our specific age or stage. We need people in all ages and stages who can help us to seek God. We need married people, single people, divorced people, people with kids, people without kids, even cat people. We need all people together if the goal is to help each other to seek God. That's what we need. We need every single age and stage together, helping us to actually live this out. This is why at Collective we really value, especially in co-groups, the value of what we call intergenerational community. Intergenerational community. And I want to just preference before I unpack what that means, that this is not a judgment call off of or against other churches that do it differently. I think ultimately my responsibility for Lee and I, our responsibility is doing what God asks us to do. But I also want to acknowledge some of the flaws that I've seen in certain places and why we believe that God is inviting us to do something differently. Many churches have a variety of programs and age-specific ministries, and they split people up. So you go youth, preteens, young adults, young marrieds, young singles, young don't want to be single, young definitely want to be single, young people with kids, young people with dogs, 55 plus. And so what it becomes is it becomes all these little sectioned off communities of different ages and stages. And what happens? I love it. You get people that are in the same age and stage growing with each other. And though there can be good in that, I think there's something missing. The example I often give is we don't need, people that are newlyweds don't need more newlyweds to learn about marriage. You need people that have gone through it, that have fought for it, that are 30 years in and still love each other. And that's true in all areas, I believe, of our lives. We don't just need people in the same stage as us. We need people that are younger and older all together, spending time actually considering what does it look like to follow the way of Jesus in the midst, and how can we learn from each other. I've seen the harm of segmenting and isolating people. And much of the data is not encouraging in the outcome of this. And again, other churches can do whatever they want. I think for us, as we stand before God, we just go, we can't. Which means in our co-groups, we have co-groups that have teenagers and the whole gamut. Why do we do that? There's so many layers that play into that consideration. Like, for example, if you are younger, you know that we are navigating as a church is something challenging and distinct. It is not like we are experiencing massive persecution, but the shift has happened where suddenly the view of Christianity is not nearly as positive as it was. And so there are teenagers that are navigating the chaos of culture and are trying to figure out, how do I live in the way of Jesus in the midst of all of this? And what we want to do is create environments where older people, where people of different stages can go, hey, we're in it together. Now, the other side is we need to learn too. Help me to understand what you are seeing. Help me to understand what you are navigating. Help me to understand the questions that your friends are asking. And we grow together. We need each other. That's not just for teenagers. It's for every single age and stage. We need each other. And if we are going to become the kind of community that seeks to seek God, we need to do that communally. Every single generation of our church needs to see this stuff lived out. And so in cultures or in a time where there's things like deconstruction and people walk away from their faith, how much of a gift it is for someone to see someone who has navigated the challenges of faith and yet is faithfully walking it out 50 years later. For someone who is older and has seen the challenges or the underbelly at times of the church, how beautiful is it to see someone who is younger, who is passionate and ready to charge the gates of hell with a water pistol, This is the kind of community we want to build, intergenerational, for us to be together, for us to grow together with Jesus at the very center. Jesus' transforming presence at the center. And I believe wholeheartedly that our church is at its best when it is together. Now, is that at times messier? Yes. Is that mess precisely where we're supposed to go? You bet. Circling back to Hebrews 10, 24, 25, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Let us encourage one another because time is short. We want to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what he did. We as a church exist to make it all about people seeing Jesus. We want to be formed and transformed in the way of Jesus. He is at the center of every single thing that we are doing. And so you might wonder, I've talked about co-groups, you might wonder, okay, where is community best expressed in the context of collective? And for us, it's in two places, co-groups and teams. Say it all the time. We put all of our energy in two baskets, team and co-groups. It's where we develop people, where we invite them deeper and into leadership development and growth, and also in co-groups where people are known and valued and challenged and encouraged in community. We believe that co-groups and we believe that teams are essential and transformative. But here's the challenge. Co-groups or team are not a silver bullet. Co-groups especially are not a silver bullet. You could show up to co-groups. You could check the box. You could do it for a couple weeks. And then you could back away and say, you know what, I didn't find what I was looking for. And you miss the very depths of what could be. It is possible, and unfortunately for some of us, easier to show up, share surface level, avoid messiness, and miss out on the best stuff. So here is my loving and pastoral challenge. Get out of the shallow end. Stop settling for surface. One of the challenges that I have is I imagine our church like a pond or a lake that has this big shallow end and yet all this deep stuff that is happening, much of which you may not even see unless you dive in. And I see people nibbling around the edges, and I just want you to know I long for more for you. I want you to experience the depths of what is happening here. I want you to experience the depths of what we see in our co-group leaders or what we see developing in our teams, what we notice God doing. We want that for you. But I also feel the tension of recognizing I can say all of that and do everything that I can to create structure for that, and you could still choose not to. And it's hard because I want more for each of us. And part of it is that I understand that maturity in following the way of Jesus is not something that is guaranteed over time. There are people that have been in churches for many, many, many years that when we spend time with them, they do not look more like Jesus. Maturity, just simply being around, is not a guarantee of actual transformation in the way of Jesus. Even people that have been following Jesus for a long period of time can still be in the shallow end, resisting some things that they need to deal with, coming up against a wall of taking the mask off and going, nope, I don't want to do this. Only being around people that think like them, look like them, act like them. See, the truth is that we can do all of this, say all of it, and you can choose not to do it. And all I want to do regularly is challenge and lovingly call you into deeper. Get out of the shallow end. Stop settling for something lesser. The deep stuff is hard. See, I think one of the the over-promising part is what I've tried to do even in this, of not over-promising the challenge of community. The beauty is so much better than you think, and yet the cost is still there. I don't want to acknowledge or not acknowledge that. So you just go, wow, it just seems like it's all just sunshine and rainbows. We just hang out together and sing Kumbaya. This is great. Because that's not ultimately what it is. But it's better. And even better than that, it's what your soul was made for. See, we have strong desires. What I want to call to is the deep ones, the deeper ones. Not just the things we want right now, but the things that we are desperately longing for. I want to challenge you, get out of the shallow end and jump into the deep end. If you're in a co-group, live this stuff out. You'll have lots of challenges as you do your journal this week that will point and confront. The truth is that we are building this kind of community. We have really, and I mean it, exceptional leaders leading co-groups. Amazing people. You can learn from them, grow with them. They are spectacular people. But I do not want you to put all the pressure on them and absolve yourself of responsibility. Each of us build this kind of community. Each of us build the kind of community that is centered around the transforming presence of Jesus. Next week, we'll spend more time talking about vulnerability, and it will probably challenge and confront each of us, and that is good. But I want to invite you to step into community. If you're not in a co-group, our co-groups have filled up fast, but there is some room, and we'd love to do what we can to get you in a co-group. We'd love to invite you to jump into the team and serve and be cared for and prayed for and share your stuff. Even before the service, we had a long period of time where we're talking about what God's doing, sharing burdens and praying for each other. It is not just about us doing tasks. We are developing. We're helping each other to be transformed by Jesus. You could be part of that. Reject the lie that is so prevalent around us, that surface is enough, that simply just checking off the box is enough. And let's do what Hebrews says. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of His return is drawing near. I want to invite you to stand up. And I want to call the worship team up, and I want to pray for all of us. Part of the reason that I think it's important to communicate the necessity of each of us being involved in community is because the kind of community that God is inviting us to build will take all of us. And there are moments that what we're trying to do is so, at times, countercultural that it costs a tremendous amount. And so what I would love for you to do is I'd love for you to close your eyes right now. And if you are in the room and maybe you're already plugging in, maybe you're involved in leadership, maybe you're in a co-group, or maybe you find yourself pulled into this kind of community. And if you are in that place, whether you're already committed or maybe you want to be increasingly committed with every single eye closed, I want to just invite you to put your hand up. If you want to build this kind of community, just put your hand up, just before God. And I want to pray for each of you. God, help us to become the kind of community that puts your Son at the very center, to be transformed by you. God, as there is resistance, even in our own hearts, would you break that down? Help us to become the kind of community that does what you ask us to do, even when it costs us. And so, God, we will not be surprised when there is challenge. We will not be surprised when it is harder to show up. We will not be surprised when there are things pulling us in different directions. But we choose you. We want to be formed and transformed by you. And so, God, where there is wounding, Where there is a pattern of maybe putting yourself out there and being hurt before, would you guard and protect? Would you heal that? God, we know that community is messy, and we will say things to each other that will poke and prod in some areas of our lives that are difficult. Would you give us the courage not to back away from people, but to seek to become more and more like you in the midst of the tension and the crucible? God, we know that the best relationships happen in the fire, when we labor together. And so, God, build your church. Holy Spirit, as we do this journal, we are simply just making space for you, and I pray that as we make space for you, that you would grow us and transform us, that you would change us. God, we are so desperately in need of you, and we recognize that the community around us needs to see something different. So build it here. Help us to have eyes that are fixed on you, eyes that people that recognize and respond to what you are asking us to do. Build your church. Holy Spirit, come. Amen.